No, those other lines.
Is there a timekeeper, or am I going to be keeping my own time? No, okay, my time, no, that's fine, that's okay. No stress. If you guys are speaking for 7 minutes or 8 minutes? 8 minutes, and how many minutes reply? 4 minutes. Okay.
Now, is the extra build time, is it 15 or 20 seconds?
We'll do 4, 8, 6, 20. Okay, is that okay? Okay. So expanded after your first minute, okay, and then in your last minute, okay, so then look your eyes before or after the bang, and then for your time speeches, I will only bang in the last minute so that you guys know to wrap up, and then after your 20 seconds, then it's okay. Okay, do you guys have any questions before we start? Any questions, clarity, concerns? Yeah?
What are your pronouns?
She, her. Any other questions, concerns? Yes.
Is it okay if we take our phone up to time?
Yes, I'll assume. Okay. If everybody's ready to start, the motion is this House opposes the glorification of brutes in narratives of success. Top one, whenever you're ready.
I'm going to begin my speech in 3,
2, 1. A side which actively promotes characters to either kill themselves or put everything into their goal. The side that actively promotes you to kill yourself and put everything into your goal is a side that is going to burn out and ultimately fail, and that is why we're going to oppose. And that is why we oppose this glorification of grit in the media. Okay, so 4 things in the speech. First of all, framing characterization. Second of all, trade-offs and criteria. Third of all, how media has tangible harm to actors in society. And fourth, my positive matter about why grit is bad for humans. So, in order to win this debate, we're going to prove that glorification is harmful to not only the actors in film, but also the people who engage in media and how it has tangible harms that are manifested and seen throughout society. First of all, what do human goals look like? Because human goals are an incredibly important thing. Grit is a driving factor of human goals. And so when we look at human goals, we see that they're ever-changing. Not only are they ever-changing, but they're always temporary. For example, your goal, first of all, it might be to make it to provincials as a debater. But then once you're at provincials, your goal is going to evolve, it's going to change. And then your goal is to rank well provincials. It's going to be to go to nationals, etc. These are the goals that are always changing. And if you want to achieve higher, we think that if your goal orientated, then you're never going to be happy. And because grit is such a driving factor of goals, we see that not only are people just trying to achieve goals in a manner that is ever-changing, evolving, but also we see that people are trying to achieve goals at the detriment of their own mental health. We also tell you that grit manifests itself in everyday lives in the following ways. First of all, we see this idea of like no sleep until I get my exam marks back, or no smiling until exams are over, or working through struggles to the detriment of yourself. We tell you that grit looks like working to the point where you forget everything just so that you can achieve a specific goal. It's working through all of the hardships just so that you can achieve a specific goal. And this is what it looks like, for example, within a school. It looks like no sleep until exams, or I'm going to pull an all-nighter. And despite how bad I feel, even if I feel sick going into this exam, I'm just going to push through and persevere. And we tell you that this is a negative thing. We also tell you that humans have specific capabilities, that the glorification of grit sets unrealistic standards for people to actually achieve, and that not everybody, for example, can be a chess grandmaster such as the Queen's Gambit. So, as first speaker, I'm going to be telling you why grit is bad for humans. My second speaker is going to be talking about the importance of goals, isolation, and my third speaker is going to be doing rebuttal. So, what do we trade off in this speech? First of all, we tell you that we're willing to trade off a slight success if it means that you're going to have a greater mental health and better relationships with family. We also tell you that your working life, or to have a congruent work-life balance or whatever, you've got this idea of 2 batteries. Well, the one might be the goals that you're trying to achieve or your actual working standard, and if that battery is full, that you're still required to have the other battery full, which is talking about your personal life, your social life, your mental health. Now, we tell you that people aren't likely to be able to function well if they're negatively detrimented by their grit, by their mental health, or they're pushing away friends and family. I'll take your POA.
You said that grit doesn't necessarily mean that you will achieve your goal. You used the example of being a grandmaster, but you not say that if you did not have grit, then this wouldn't be able to happen at all.
No, because we tell you that grit is different to motivation. We tell you that people can still be highly motivated without having grit. Grit is something that happens when you push yourself to persevere through every single thing, even if it is to the detriment of your mental being. You can be motivated. I can be heavily motivated to do well at provincials. I can be heavily motivated to do well in my exams. But if I get my full 8 hours of sleep, I'm more likely to do better in those exams than if I were to have an all-nighter and persevere through the detriment to the detriment of my own mental health and well-being. So we tell you that those 2 things are not mutually exclusive. So we tell you that people aren't always going to succeed if they have grit as well, because we tell you that grit is more likely to result in things like burnout, or you're more likely to push away your friends and family, which I'm going to go into further. But basically, the underlying conclusion from this is that a lower mental health is going to result in lower productivity, and we tell you that grit is a detriment to your mental health because you're persevering through things that you shouldn't be persevering for. For example, humans need sleep for a reason. Staying up all night so that you can do well means you're more likely to do worse in that thing, not do better because you practiced all night. So, when do we oppose something? We have 3 criteria for this. First of all, when it's detrimental to the act at hand. Second of all, when it creates harmful narrative. And third of all, when this portrayal leads to action. And so who does this affect? This affects either the characters or actors within the film and media, but it also, in fact, affects people who engage in this film and media. We tell you that it affects these people because people are more likely to be tangibly harmed when there's an already existing narrative. When there's a pre-existing narrative that gets reinforced through film and media, such as this pre-existing narrative that you have to have grit that already exists in the real world, we tell you that it's going to be glorified through the use of film and media, and that is when we oppose it, because it's going to have these tangible harms. Because people are likely to engage in things that they have seen in media. There's likely to be the portrayal of grit is likely to lead to action, because if there's a pre-existing narrative of that that is glorified in media that people consume, they're going to have this preconception that it may not be a bad thing. And when they see people, this glorification of grit, particularly in success stories, we tell you that people are more likely to engage in this, and this is a portrayal that's going to lead to action. We also tell you that under opposition side, in failure, they lose everything. They have no happiness, they have no friends, because they have pushed away family, they have foregone their mental health. For example, we use these examples of the Queen's Gambit. Even though, if she had failed, she would have had nothing but her alcohol and pill addiction left. Black Swan, if she had failed, she would have had nothing but her depression and her suicidal thoughts left. These are the things that we tell you that in failure, even on side proposition side, if you fail, on our side, we're still likely to have the journey or mental health still being intact. You're less likely to have pushed away your friends and family. You're less likely to have foregone sleep to achieve this. And so in failure, we're better. Second of all, we're also less likely to fail under side proposition. So not only are we better in failure, but we're also better in, we're also less likely to fail in the first place. That's because side proposition values longevity. Side proposition is less likely to burn out. We tell you that this is true because when you're not foregoing things that are incredibly important to your mental health, when you're not foregoing sleep, for example, you're less likely to burn out. If you work an 80-hour work week for 10 years, you're more likely to burn out. Yeah. So, why is this grit bad for humans? We have three key reasons for this. First of all, there's an impact on mental health. Second of all, an impact on physical health. And third of all, the impact on friends and families. So grit may be the driving factor, but as I've already said, it's not mutually exclusive to your goals. So, first thing, why does it have an impact on mental health with grit? As I've been saying, you're more likely to push away you're more likely to push away things that are not going to help you achieve your goal. We tell you that people are more likely to persevere having no friends if it means that they're going to achieve their goal, because they are so heavily focused on their goal, because they have this narrative that they have to achieve this goal at all costs. And we tell you that this is the impact on mental health. The impact on physical health is things like foregoing hygiene, depression, sleep, the hierarchy of need, things like that. People are more likely to not exercise during exams, for example, so that they can achieve better results, and we tell you that this is part of grit. Third of all, we tell you that it's an impact on friends and family, because you push away things that you're not likely to need in order to achieve your goal, because you become too goal-orientated. So in this speech, we tell you that, first of all, grit is different to motivation, and that second of all, in failure, proposition has a better side than opposition, and that we're less likely to fail. Thank you very much.
In a world where we find that grit is being overlooked at and mischaracterized and seen as less of a benefit and more of a form of self-torture, we find that this is not actually including the possible benefits and the actual real reason that grit exists within society, and the reason that we would like to prefer it over what proposition has not actually, what proposition has failed to disclose as in a model or some form of alternative. And I'd get back into that within my rebuttal. But before I speak about that, I'm just going to give an idea of a case split and an idea of what I'm going to be speaking about on my second speaker. I'm going to be first speaking about my rebuttal and rebutting what proposition has brought up within the case so far, providing the burdens that we as side proposition will prove and what we would like out of side proposition, and an idea of framing and contextualization, as well as a metric and criteria, and a main point and arguments on why we find that grit is actually beneficial, and why we need grits to stay a narrative, to stay as a beneficial narrative and instill good characteristics, okay? My second speaker will be focusing on supporting my arguments that I've brought up, and focusing on mainly the actors and general implications that come in within society and monoliths. And his arguments will mainly be on what actually comes along with the worlds that are presented with the loss of glorification of grit, and why we find that it would be more detrimental than anything we currently have in a society. Now, to give an idea of a criteria or metric, we believe that glorification of grit in society is a narrative that is spread across the masses, that is extremely beneficial, and I'll get into that within my argumentation and prove that. We believe that it benefits the actors way more than any form of alternative that can be brought up that was actually failed to be brought up. But I'll get into that with rebuttal and argumentation and things like that. Now, in terms of what we're going to be proving as side proposition as a house, we have two main points. First, on the glorification of grit and how that is actually immediately justified, and secondly, and how the glorification of grit is necessary for the most vulnerable actor to be successful and be benefited. I'll just move on to my rebuttal and then move on to my argumentation after that. I only have a few points, around 2 or 3. Basically, their case was very heavily focused on the harms that come along with grit and what our humans are actually supposed to be looked at and characterized as, humans in society and things like that. And I'll get into that. They brought up how human goals are forever changing and extremely short term, when we in fact find that the motion is supposed to be trying to cater towards long-term goals and the benefits that come along with persevering towards that, rather than short-term goals and outbursts that don't really need as much grit or motivation that would probably be needed for long-term goals. And we find that the benefits that come along with these short-term goals that proposition has characterized and mischaracterized within this motion, we find that this is not providing the possible benefits that can come along with rather taking side opposition's benefits. Now, they say that goal orientation and living a goal-orientated lifestyle is forever going to be perpetually unhappy, or you're going to live perpetually unhealthy. And we find that this is a complete mischaracterization, and I'll get into that in another point, and I'll flag that within the rebuttal in just a moment. But to bring up a few more points of rebuttal, they said that humans are talent-specific. For example, they brought up how in the Queen's Gambit, not everyone is going to be able to become the Queen's Gambit and become a master chess player or a grandmaster in chess or anything like that. But we find that this is the reason that grit and that narrative of perseverance needs to be pushed towards something. Because nobody wakes up and suddenly, without any recollection of knowing the game of chess, understands how chess works. Chess is a game that is learned. Other skills and things like that that are needed for perseverance are things that are learned and built up upon. This is why we need grit, and we need that perseverance, and we need that in our society to be able to benefit the actors as most as possible, which is going to be the metric that we're going to focus on, the benefit of the actors, and we will figure that out later. Now, I'll take my POI.
Do you think that grit is absolutely necessary to achieve your goals, and if so, why is it different to motivation?
That's actually one of the things that I had already brought up just at the beginning of the rebuttal. I'll explain that just a bit more now to answer this POI. But I said that grit is not, I did in fact say that grit and this idea of motivation is not inherently needed for short-term goals and the small inherent benefits that come along with persevering with these short-term goals, and especially within the motion that we were actually handed and the infographic, it was focusing and trying to lean us towards looking at long-term goals, which was something that was completely ignored on proposition side. And we find that this is extremely important within today's debate, and we need more clarification on those points. Now, one of the things that I'd like to clear up is that long-term goals are not small. The benefits that come with long-term goals are not small. The input that you put in is the exact same output that you're going to get in and receive receive, okay? Putting in that effort and that grit and perseverance and having that characteristic is important to reap the benefits and massive benefits that were ignored by side proposition within the debate. Now let's look at motivation versus grit. And we find that this differentiation was not made on side proposition, which is an extreme mischaracterization of grit. They explained how in grit, if in failure, then all is lost. But that's not what grit is. Grit is failure and then learning from those mistakes and persevering and continuing. So how are you going to fail and give up? That's not grit. That's not perseverance. That is limited and short-term motivation, which is the inherent alternative that we're going to accept for now from side of proposition that was not explained. They did not actually provide any form of contextualization, so we're trying to get their points as strong as possible and look at them and try to argue that instead. Now, these temporary and short-term goals, we find that this is what comes along with motivation, where it's short-term, it's not long-lasted, but grit is having more than motivation. It's figuring out that, hey, this is going to be hard, but I'm still going to be able to persevere. And we find that even if there is problems that arise, and even if we want that payoff that is needed, okay? Now I'm going to be moving on to my argumentation, which is going to be one main point on focusing on our most vulnerable actor, not taken. Just to give an idea of framing and look at what we need to focus on within this argument, the goals of good narratives is what we need to look at, and why is what we need to look at within today's debate and focus on, okay? It is to instill levels of perseverance and the actual benefits of the actors that are needed. But more importantly, perseverance and discipline in terms of long-term goals, which is what I've been trying to explain to proposition that we need to focus on within today's debate, okay? Removing the narrative instills some sort of, removing the narrative that grit is not needed, that grit is needed, instills this perfect world where, well, in this perfect world where everything is imperfect, so if you fail, then you might as well give up because there's no point in continuing. This installation of this bad mindset and world that we're looking at, okay? Now, I'll look at 3 points in the argumentation, like why would we like to focus on good narratives, okay? This is what we need to be put in, okay? This is what needs to be pushed. This is what needs to be affecting the most vulnerable actors. This is promoting people to work hard for their long-term goals to reap the long-term and bigger benefits. And we find that that's the way that we're going to win this debate, by proving who benefits the actor the most, okay? What does this tell us, okay? It tells us that good narratives instill beneficial characteristics that we want within our actors so that they can actually work towards their goals and reap the benefits that are needed. Why do we want this glorification, okay? It's because grit is realistically the only viable situation or solution in terms of focusing on what the most vulnerable actor actually wants and how we can benefit the most vulnerable actor, which is the way that we want to win this debate, okay? What other forms of media is there to supply, or what other narratives do we want to push onto the actor that doesn't already come along with perseverance, okay? What we need to look at and instill and look at the benefits that come with instilling perseverance as a narrative within society and within our actors, okay? What have I done? I've proved within my debate specifically, within this few seconds that I have, I've proved that the burden is extremely necessary for us to actually win this debate and be able to instill the proper narratives needed for us to win this debate. And with that, I'd like to thank you.
Okay, are you ready for me? Okay. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. It is said that the person who is happy is the person who has enough. However, on opposition side, they never have enough. Why? Because goals are temporary and always changing. Throughout my speech, I'll be doing 4 things. Firstly, strategic flaws. Secondly, well, basically is the same as reframing. Secondly, rebuttal. And thirdly, my argumentations. So, moving on to strategic flaws and the mischaracterization we got from opposition, that is really detrimental to the case. It's this idea that they've mischaracterized glorification, and they haven't understood the importance of this in the debate. Why is that? Because we need to understand what glorification is. Glorification is portraying only the positive aspects. Glorification is making this thing seem like an amazing thing that everyone should aspire to, that everyone should want to be, that everyone should ultimately achieve. And the outcome is, if you don't achieve this, you have nothing. That is to the extent which glorification works. They have not highlighted that in any of their case. They have not engaged with that in any of the case, and neither have they engaged with all of the detrimental impact of glorification that my first speaker gave you, right? So to firstly move on to rebuttal, we firstly need to clash with this idea between short-term and long-term benefits that they want to bring on their side, because they want to highlight the fact that they're long-term and they're going to achieve that. However, they don't understand that their short-term benefits are going to be the same as their long-term benefits, because the method at which they get that is the same. What does it mean? It means they suffer. Suffering is the same. On the short term, they suffer to get the short-term goal. On the long term, they suffer to get the long-term goal, which means there's no difference between them. There's no way in which to distinguish them. But furthermore, they only can ever achieve short-term goals. Why is that? Because we need to look at the impact of burnout. On their side, when you work at 100%, when you give your very all, when you prioritize your goal above everything else, when you prioritize your goal above your happiness, above your sleep, above your tiredness, above your need to just have a rest, it means you can only work short-term. You can only achieve that goal, rest, and then move on, which means that you have no ability to focus on long-term goals because you're so focused and hyper-fixated on this one specific thing. And therefore, like, we can use examples like in Gilmore Girls, I'll only sleep, I'll only be happy after I get into Harvard, which means that they only have short-term goals that only focus on one specific thing. Therefore, I've highlighted the likelihood of burnout. I'd like to move on to the second clash, which is the difference between motivation and grit. We need to understand that they're likely the same, or very much the same. Motivation is the inspiration to do more. It's the inspiration to get out of bed. It is not the punishment to get out of bed. That's the difference. Inspiration is wanting to get your goals. It's wanting to do well. It's wanting to prove yourself and your parents proud. Motivation is inspiring to do that, whereas grit is doing that, but at the harm to yourselves. Grit is pushing even though you have a broken finger. Grit is like what Kobe does. Kobe Bryant, known as the Mamba, he dislocates his finger, he plops it back in, he carries on. That is so painful. However, grit is pushing through the pain. And my first speaker highlighted how harmful that is, but I'll highlight more harmful. So the difference is that it's at a detriment to yourself. Motivation is only a positive thing that inspires you to do well, but grit is you have to do this, otherwise you're a failure, right? Secondly, lastly in my characterization, I'd like to attack their argument, which is basically think that this narrative is necessary for success, and without it, we cannot ever get success. We need to understand that it is not necessary. This is one of my POIs, one of my positive matters, which I'll highlight further and I'll flag you when I get there. But it is not necessary for success. Why is that? It's because we still have the characteristics that are likely to get you to success. What does that mean? It means we have the characteristics of discipline. We have the characteristics of motivation. We have the characteristics of doing it even though you like the motivation to do it. You still have discipline. You still have this ability to do that. The difference is that you focus on your mental health. The difference is that you take breaks. The difference is that you have a support system. But I'll really explain this in depth in my positive matter, so I don't want to go too much now and then repeat it later because that's repetitive. So, therefore, to conclude my rebuttal, I've proven to you why. Firstly, their whole framing that they gave between long-term... Okay.
What about if you don't try for what you want more than anything? What will you have?
Okay, on our side, my first speaker gave you this where clearly they missed it. It means that on either side, both sides have the possibility on failure. On our side, we appreciate the little things. We appreciate the journey. We appreciate the fact that we're going to highlight our friends, our family. We're going to still have that. We're not going to isolate ourselves. On their side, they isolate themselves. They're competing with everyone. They're hurting themselves. They're not sleeping. But ultimately, they still fail. When they fail, they think that, oh, why wasn't I good enough? Why didn't I get my goal? I gave everything into this goal, yet I still didn't achieve it. I'm a failure. I gave my all into it. There was no way I could do, which means I'm not good enough to get that goal. The difference that on their side, they have nothing. On our side, we have our friends, our family, our support. We have our mental health. We have our wellness because of the fact that we don't detriment ourselves in order to get the goal, because we understand that the goal can be achieved through other means. We understand that it's only one simple goal. It's not our life. It's not our happiness. It's not our future. Nothing is determined on one goal because you know what? Life moves on. We understand the importance of goals, which will bring me into my positive matter. So before I go to my positive matter, I'd like to conclude my rebuttal and show the impact of my rebuttal. The impact of my rebuttal is that we can't opt into the argument that it is necessary for success, because we've shown you how we can get success on other means. It means that comparatively, both sides are likely to get success. The difference is the detriment to yourself. On our side, we prioritize ourselves, our happiness. On their side, they don't. That is the difference between our two sides, right? So with that, I'd like to move on to my argumentation, which is the importance of goals that are based on grit, which is literally goes directly against everything that's said, so I'd like to flag it now. This is operating under the fact that even if they get their goal, even if they do achieve and reach their goal, even if they are holistically good, why do we still not support that side? Why do we still not think it's a good thing? This is because we firstly need to characterize grit. We need to characterize that grit is at the cost of everything. The justification of that is this is because of how it's been portrayed in media. Example, Swan Lake. She literally kills herself. She kills herself to get her role. And she thinks she's happy after she's done it, even though her life is literally forfeited for this one small production. In Whiplash, they literally destroy their hands. That's why we understand that grit is at the cost to yourself, right? The mechanisms under this argument are threefold. Firstly, the importance of goals. Secondly, it's not the only way to success. And thirdly, a goal mentality versus a characteristic mentality. So let's firstly explain the importance of a goal. We need to understand that this is only one goal. It's only one mark. It's only one team. It's only one debate. It's only one singular aspect, one singular circumstances. So therefore, we need to understand that it's one thing. Therefore, we need to do a bit of weighing here. Is the harms you've caused yourself, do those outweigh the singular goal? Which is yes. The goal is not enough to outweigh the harms. Why is this? Because the harms is that you sacrifice your happiness, you sacrifice yourself. What is the importance of happiness? Firstly, happiness is important for your everyday functionality. This is because of your endorphins. You need endorphins to stay alert. You need endorphins to have a good mood. You need endorphins to have concentration, to work hard, to be alive, and to just function as a human being. On their side, they sacrifice those endorphins in order to get this one singular goal. Therefore, the one singular goal can never outweigh this thing. The second mean is it's not the only way to success. It's because we can understand you're still hardworking, you still have motivation, you still get your goals. It's because of the fact that you take breaks, you prioritize your mental health, you have support, you have friends and family. This leads to long-term functionality versus short-term burnout. Because of the fact that when you want to take a rest, you have the support system, you have the means to do it. The third mechanism is the goal mentality versus the characteristic mentality. This is because we can understand that goals are one, temporary, and two, changing, which means that as soon as you reach one goal, you always want another goal, which you always want another goal. There's never enough, which means you never have the ability to truly be happy under their side, versus the characteristic mentality, which is the fact that you want to be disciplined, you want to be happy, you want to be kind, you want to focus on all of the good characteristics that lead you to grow yourself, that lead you to have a good mentality, that lead you to have yourself, to love yourself and to grow yourself. That is how you achieve success on the characteristic mentality. So therefore, the impact on our side is we have greater happiness, we avoid short-term harm, we have quantity of work done and quality of life. So with that, I'd like to conclude my speech by showing the weighing between the two sides. We need to understand that our side has all of the positive benefits of success, and the success, even when you fail, on their side, they only have the success. But when they don't have success, they have nothing. They detriment themselves, they hurt themselves, they harm themselves. For what? For one goal? That is not enough. Thank you.
It's sad to see a team that's trying to push forward what's best for the most valuable actor when what they actually want for the most valuable actor is for them to constantly stay at their bare minimum, stay as medium and mediocre as possibly as they can, because they're trying to say that they don't achieve the things that they want to achieve, where they put that at the detriment of them trying to get their long-term success and their long-term fulfillment of becoming the best that they can be, which is what grit is all about. So first, within my speech today, I'll be giving a rebuttal, moving on to my actors analysis, which they didn't give a full characterization upon, and then lastly, I'll be giving my argumentation, and if time permits, I'll be doing comparative analysis. So firstly, my main point of argumentation, right? We see that they said that the goals change. We have to make, for example, making profs, making the first team soccer team, and doing all of those things. But those things require strong determination, strong grit to achieve those goals. But with that motivation, which they're trying to push forward to, that is just, which I'll characterize further, what motivation is, which I'll characterize further. Motivation is just you wanting to do something, wanting the want, not actually the action of doing something, which we both conceded to within their second speaker's speech. So we believe that their action, they're trying to do it, they're wanting to do, won't be achieved on their side. The long-term goals which you want aren't achieved on their side. It's only achieved on our side, which I'll further prove within my argumentation. Right? I'll take you later, sir. So then they said that they have to pull all-nighters, mental health, all of those factors which you suffer. But I believe grit is the fact about you suffer to gain more. The gain that you get is far outweighs the suffering that you take to get there. Blood, sweat, and tears require you to achieve and become the best that you can be, right? So when we look at the whole factor of motivation, which is basically the entire case, we see motivation is a short-term feeling. It's just like an energy drink. You take that, you feel energy for one match, and after that, you don't have that same energy to do what you want to achieve, right? We see that is what we don't need when we want to achieve long-term goals, because when we look at the motion, when we look at everything, they say to achieve long-term goals, I'll take you later, when we see what grit is to achieve the long-term goals, right? So we don't see that we achieve those certain things with motivation. So when we see that already, they really fail on trying to make forward what the actor really wants within today's debate. So then they said they're less likely to fail because we are long-term, but I've already disproven this because motivation is short-term. So moving on to their second speaker, right? They said that we mischaracterize glorification, but on the contrary, you guys mischaracterize what motivation and grit is, right? So we see that grit is achieving the long-term goals. It's not trying to achieve your short-term goals. It's not trying to achieve your day-to-day goals, which you want to there. Because when we look at the information slide that we received from when we had the briefing, we said grit is what you want to achieve your long-term goals, which is very important within today's debate, because we want to achieve the long-term goals. That is a factor which they haven't really interacted us within this whole debate. They've just pushed forward trying to achieve the short-term goals, which is not what we're trying to prove, right? Then moving on to my second point, that they brought in a clash, right? So let me deal with this clash as well. So basically, it's motivation versus grit, right? So motivation, let me tell you what that really is. Motivation is the feeling. Is the feeling of wanting to, I'll take you later, ma'am, is the feeling to do something, feeling to want to do, which we've both conceded to, right? So when those challenges do arise, what are you going to do? I can feel that I want to overcome the challenges. I can feel that I have to persevere, but the action to do it isn't there. The motivation to do that action, I can tell you how you can train your best, train your hardest. You feel motivated to do it, but do you actually do it? That's what we want to see within today's debate. That's what the actor really needs, which is what they don't get. So I'll take you off to my rebuttal, ma'am. So when we see when we see motivation versus grit, motivation is already on the backhand. But when we look at grit, right, what is grit and how are we better? Grit makes you feel. Grit makes you better. All in all, because one, grit is the feeling and the doing of wanting to achieve your goals, right? I feel that, okay, I've hit a roadblock, I've hit a challenge, I need to overcome this, and now I'm doing the action, which is what grit is, which we received in the information slide, which is what they're not actually interacting on us with, right? So we see that you see that we do take the trade-off, you lose your family, you lose your friends, but it is not as important to reach your goals, right? But we see that grit, family, you can regain your family, you can reconnect with your friends, but one thing you can't regain, what you think you can't re-achieve is your long-term goals, right? We don't say we have that, on the contrary. So with that being said, we are already on the forefront of today's debate. So before I move on to my actors analysis, I'd like to take a POI, sir.
Do you think that dedication to one goal is healthy, even though it comes at the cost of other parts of your life, such as your physical, mental, and social well-being?
So I already deal with this POI. When I said you suffer to gain, the suffering that you feel now isn't as big as when you look at the gain that you're going to receive. The gain of achieving the long-term goals that you wanted. The gain that you say, I've done this, I'm at the best of my possibility, and I'm now at the best that I can possibly be. That outweighs the blood, sweat, and tears that you've already had out, right? So moving on to my actors, right? The actors that we see today are the masses, right? So we break this down into three sections, right? We see the most vulnerable actor being the people with long-term goals that are hard to achieve and don't have it easy. The second one, people that do get it easy. And thirdly, kids, right? And you may be wondering why kids, but kids, they consume pop culture the most, which is what we received on the info slide. They receive pop culture the most, and they really do need it the most, right? So when we look at the most vulnerable actor, which are the people, I'll take you later, ma'am, which are the people with these long-term goals and are hard to achieve, we see that the goals of them, they want to make it out of their challenges and to achieve their long-term goals, right? They want to overcome the problems that they may have when trying to achieve that. So the incentive for them to get this motion, the incentive for them to use grit is already there because it aligns with that goal. Grit gives you and it shows you that through the narrative that the challenges that you face on permanent, they're temporary, which you can overcome, which you can do something about to change the situation that you're in, right? But so when we see this, right, we already align with the most vulnerable actor of today's debate, which are trying to uphold and try to better. So when we see this, right, we see that we are already on the forefront of one, making the most vulnerable actor the best way that they can possibly be and helping them achieve their goals. And secondly, we're already on the forefront by telling you that grit outweighs motivation in all facets. So moving on to my argumentation, I have 2 points of argumentation. One being that the challenges will arise, and under this I have 3 main mechanisms. One being when trying to achieve the challenges, when trying to achieve your goals, challenges come. Secondly, Secondly, when we look at this, how you face the problem, and thirdly, how the challenge actually, how you overcome the challenge, right, and how it actually pans out the results. And then my second point of positive matter: what should the media provide to those with long-term goals that are hard to achieve? So on my first point of positive matter, we see that the challenges will arise. Under the first mechanism, right, we see that trying to achieve your goal, when trying to achieve your long-term goals, I'll sit down, please. When trying to achieve your long-term goals, challenges will occur, obviously, and how you face them, that's the important thing, how you face those challenges. So when we look at this, right, on my second point, when we look at this, we see that when we look at it on our side, on the comparative, they see the problem in trying to achieve their goal, they see the problem, they see that they get the motivation to try and change it, but the action isn't there with motivation, as we both concede to the fact of that how motivation is. So that we see that that's the basics of motivation. You're basically giving up when one challenge arises. So when we see this on our side, right, we see that the challenge comes, we see the challenge, and we overcome that challenge using grit, because grit isn't the short term. Grit is the short term trying to overcome the challenges. Grit is the long term determination and discipline trying to going to achieve your goals. So you may hit roadblocks, but you still use that discipline that you've instilled in yourself to achieve the long-term goals. So no matter what, so what we push for is the actor. We push for the actor to achieve the long-term goals, but on the contrary, we don't get that. So on my second point of positive matter, what should the media provide to those who get it, right? So let's look at this under 2 facets, which we've already had within today's debate. 1, motivation, and 2, to link my first argument back, so we get this through the glorification, right? The glorification is the key word in this, why we oppose the glorification. So we want the glorification because...
Okay, if everyone's ready, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So the answer to who won this debate is honestly quite obvious, though by the way the debate's gone, it might seem quite mysterious. And that answer can honestly be found in opposition's failure to accept the definition of grit that was provided in the info side, and ultimately zero in on this idea of perseverance being the same as grit, whilst neglecting the key thing that differentiates perseverance and grit, which is this intense, passionate fixation on your goal that is described in the info slide that they were provided with, as were we. So they honestly should not be ignoring this. It's cost them their case. So what am I going to be doing throughout my speech? 3 things. First, a strategic reframing and looking at why strategically they're already losing the debate. And 2, looking at the first clash, which is whether or not grit is positive in terms of its function and its portrayal and how humans engage with it. And thirdly, looking at the second clash, which is how the glorification of grit affects viewers. And I think it's really important, just jumping into my reframing and clarity, that we focus on the word glorification and we understand what it really means for this debate. We've told you that glorification, from P1 by the way, which has gone unengaged with, that glorification means you are without a doubt painting something as glorious, as completely ideal and something to aspire to. We think that this means that even when there are bad sides being portrayed, you're portraying those bad sides as being beneficial or as being something you want to happen to you, even if they are harming you. And we think it can also look like completely neglecting to portray those bad sides simply to show that, no, this is a completely positive experience. We think both of those are just harmful because it's not true to reality. You're going to suffer, you're going to fight, there are going to be bad sides and good sides to everything, and we want people to be able to view these sides objectively and not with this preconceived narrative of this is good, this is bad. Moreover, we think we need to look at what grit is and clarify why grit isn't the same as discipline or good work ethic. And this is because if I can prove that grit isn't as they describe it, their entire case falls flat and ours ultimately wins this debate. So what have we seen within the info slide? They told us in the info slide at a base level that grit is an intense, passionate fixation on a goal. So this looks like a complete dedication to fulfilling one goal or a set of goals, whether it be long-term and short-term, but I'll touch on the long-term thing later on. And ultimately, that has gone completely neglected, and that is what all of our impacts are laying on. And that truthful foundation that our impacts are laying on, since it's been unengaged with, all of our impacts still stand. So we also need to analyze and look at the fact that the common denominator for all of the portrayals of grit within these movies like Whiplash, Black Swan, etc., is that these actors went through intense processes of self-harm to reach the success. This looks like Black Swan quite literally saying throughout the movie, I just want to be perfect, I just want to be perfect, and then stabbing herself at the end of her performance, and as she's dying saying, oh, well, at least I was perfect. And so her success is then portrayed as glorious and positive, and we don't get to objectively see the fact that she has stabbed herself and she's put herself through this intense suffering that isn't healthy to get to this point. Ultimately, I need to prove also that success is symmetric. Success can exist on both sides of the house to win this debate. So I want to tell you, as they've told us throughout the entire idea of grit being positive, that grit is the best or the most paramount way to achieve success. We've told you that there are many, many other ways of achieving success. Like my first and second speaker said, motivating yourself and doing that. Perseverance, as we've told you, can exist without the intense fixation. This could look like going and putting your best effort into work whilst caring for your family and engaging with your friends and balancing out your life holistically, as we've tried to explain and been ignored throughout this entire debate, where we think that an important thing to consider in terms of success is that success can also rely on different parts of your identity, like whether or not you were born in a place of power, whether or not maybe you were born to rich parents who are able to afford to send you to a good school, or whether or not you were born in a position of poverty. We think that success is dependent on things beyond just whether or not you're able to work hard, because we live within a context that ultimately favors certain people based on their racial identity, sexualities, etc. With that being said, I'll jump into my first clash, which is about whether or not grit is positive, not taken. So what we said under this clash is essentially how grit functions and the way it's portrayed is this intense fixation that involves oftentimes self-harm, like beating away at a drum to become the best drummer to the point where your hands break, fixating on chess to the point where you're taking drugs to stay awake and to stay surviving in these chess matches. It's this intense harmful engagement with your goals and this just pursuit of your goals that ultimately is harmful in nature. And we think that's true to the portrayal that is supported by the examples in the info slide. And we think that we've told you that the impacts of this is often, this means that grit and engaging with grit can lead to you isolating yourself from people and neglecting other facets of your life that we think are just key to your ultimate happiness. For example, like your physical well-being, your social well-being, your mental well-being, as I told you in my POI. But let's jump into what they said and what they said in response to my POI. They told us, well, at the end of the day, you've reached your goal, so you can just address the other things later. But let's look at this realistically. Once you've put all of your energy into your career, you're a 45-year-old, I don't know, however old you are, you have no social life, you've neglected your family for years, and you haven't engaged with the people who are your support system. So what are you left with then? You have no support system, you have no like social prospects, etc. Maybe you don't have a family, things of that nature, and you're simply relying on yourself to keep yourself afloat. But in that breath, you have expended yourself and your mental strength to get to this point of success. So ultimately, you are left with nothing to latch onto but this bleak life raft of, oh no, at least I've made $1 million by the age of like 40, 45, at least I can retire young, etc., etc. It does not look like you neglecting your family for decades, as they say that this is a long-term goal, or years on years, and then crawling back saying, oh, well, I mean, I've done well now, so can we be friends now? No, you're supposed to be there for your family members and support them. It is not a one-way street where you can go back to them and say, hey, support me now, I'm all good now, and I can hang out with you now. No, if your family member is going through something, you're going to have to be there for them and uplift them throughout that, and not just focus and be selfish and focus on yourself throughout. We think that this mindset of selfish and like egocentrical like success is not something that we want for the actors who are like engaging with grit. I'll take you.
Why is it that your side and House continues to prefer perpetual mediocrity and minimal/insignificant benefit over continued and long-term and overall success under true grit?
Okay, so we've told you that this idea of success, I just clarified this. Success is not dependent on having this grit mindset. I told you that success can be determined and predetermined by your social standing, by your identity, etc. It can also be achieved by just having a holistic viewpoint. Like my first speaker told you, you are more likely to do well in your exam if you get that full night's sleep and you have that cognitive ability, rather than if you go into that exam having studied like the entire night and cramming, which is not actually a reliable way of studying, etc., etc. So we've already told you that grit isn't like a reliable or the only means of achieving success. That point still doesn't stand. But that being said, we've told you under this clash that like grit is fundamentally harmful in its process and the way in which people engage with it. And because of that, we don't want people to engage with it. And we don't like the way it is glorified and shown as completely positive, because it is not true to reality. And within that, when we weigh this clash, we see that we're weighing like people harming themselves on their side of the house to get to this dream goal versus people like being holistic in their choices and taking care of all of their batteries and charging their family to 50%, their work life to 50%, their mental well-being to 50%, rather than putting all their 1,000% into their work life and things of that nature. We like that because we think that to have a fulfilling life, and if we answer the metric of fulfillment within this debate, we think that that is best achieved when you take care of all avenues and all factors that determine your happiness, rather than just one or your current fixation. Like we told you, we live in a world where people are constantly trying to gain more and advance more, and so we think that that constant desire to further yourself doesn't end the second you've achieved your dream goal. We think that after that you form another dream goal, etc., etc. Thank you.
In this debate, we expected side proposition to tell us why the glorification of grit should be opposed. However, what they chose to do instead was they attached things which had absolutely nothing to do with grit, and they focused too much on examples such as movies, which has absolutely nothing to do with the real world, and they couldn't show us how this could be applied within the real world. And thus we tell you that a side which is unable to understand what this motion is asking us to do is simply unable to win this debate. Now, my second speaker has already done this within his speech. He's already characterized what grit looks like, but just for the sake of this debate, I will do it again. So we tell you that, as shown in the info slide, grit is the perseverance to achieve a long-term goal. And we say that this is important as there is a recurring theme within side proposition's case of telling us that once you achieve this goal, you want something more, and I will continue to go within this deeper within my rebuttal, but I'd just like to clarify this before I can go further within my speech. Now, firstly, with my rebuttal, something they said at the very start of their case, which we have a big problem with. They said if you side with the side where you kill yourself until you burn out, this side already loses. And we tell you that this has absolutely nothing to do with grit, and there are multiple other examples of how they've mischaracterized grit. We tell you that at the center of grit, discipline is at that center, and we tell you that once you have discipline, you are able to be able to manage your time properly and put what is important, such as family and all of those things, ahead of achieving the goal which you want so desperately. We are not against the idea that you can live with your family and have a happy life, but what we are saying is that if you want something, a long-term goal, is that we are saying that grit should be glorified, because we tell you that if you do not go for it, you have a 100% of losing. So this is why we stand with grit in this case. So, Decline. They said that the goals are always changing as well, as heard in their first speaker. And we tell you that this happens because of the idea of either motivation or of grit. But the fact that they're saying that these are short-term goals and they keep on moving disproves the fact that it can possibly be grit. Now, I'm going through this because there was a gross mischaracterization of what grit actually is. So to properly debunk their entire case, I will be debating under this theme of what grit truly is and all things that fall under that. And I'm willing to accept a POI.
Okay, so can you please engage with the fact that grit is not just perseverance, it is an intense fixation and all the harms that come along with that fixation. Also, please engage with the fact that the motion includes narratives of success, which do branch into the films we described, and the intense, harmful portrayal of grit that is portrayed in those examples from the info slide.
Well, I do commend you for speaking two POIs into one. I will only answer one, and if you feel like asking it again, you are welcome to do so. On the topic of whether or not grit is the intense fixation on it, we are not going to stand here and say that is wrong, but what we are saying is that intense fixation does not necessarily have to be represented in the physical. We tell you that skipping showers and skipping time with your family doesn't necessarily show that whether or not you have grit. And we tell you that those are just people with bad hygiene and poor time management who cannot see having a life outside of their goal, and we say that this is an isolated example. Now, moving on, they said on the side of proposition, you can spend time with your family and live a healthy life. Yet again, we are not against you living a healthy life, but what we are saying is that if you want something bad enough, we tell you that you should be able to go after it. As we can see, some people are not born under the banner of being able to be born into a rich family. Some people are not born under the banner of being given that opportunity. And yet, as I've told you, if you do not try, you have a 100% chance of losing. Now, this is quite misleading, as they tell us on their side, you can just live a nice, healthy lifestyle, and we tell you that this is apparent on their side. But we tell you if side proposition were to give their case to the most vulnerable actors, instead what they would think is, oh, so that gives me the green light to just chill at home. What we are saying is that, yes, you should manage your time properly, and you should make space, Decline, you should make space to achieve your goals, because after all, it's what you want the most in life. Yet, as we have stated this within our case, this directly negates all this specific negatives which they have brought in. And yes, and yet again, this falls under the entire clash of whether or not grit detriments or benefits the actors. Decline. And we were also, they said, success is symmetrical. Now, we'd like to tell you that without grit, how can you be able to achieve anything in life? And we tell you for especially a long-term goal, we paint a picture of somebody who didn't have the head start that others were given. We paint the picture of somebody who was born in Khayelitsha, and he's going up against the richest of the rich, those who have absolutely no talent and no grit and were just given it. And we tell you, if you want to be the richest in South Africa, on some level you need an insatiable drive to keep on going. And we tell you that this is where grit comes in, essentially. We tell you that without grit, you aren't able to do this. Imagine if this guy, Tabo from Lani, just chose, hey, maybe today I'll choose to stay in. And we tell you that some days you can stay in on our side, but at the same time, you need to be able to keep on going without stopping, no matter what trials and tribulations you may face. And before I continue, I'd like to take a POI.
You were trying to have both at the same time. When in your first speaker, you said you're trading off on these simultaneous benefits for the long-term success you will eventually reach. You cannot now say in your op 3 that I'm going to succeed whilst maintaining my health, whilst maintaining my family. You already made that trade-off in your first speaker.
Now, we tell you that all these bad things that my first speaker was talking about were the things that come with dedicating yourself to a specific goal. And we're not saying that once you dedicate your time to a specific goal, you aren't able to spend time with important people such as your family. We tell you that there are some things that you will have to give up for the sake of discipline to further your grit, to further your need. And we tell you that things such as just lazing around and doing absolutely nothing have to be discarded. Yet at the same time, we tell you that you need to make time for things that are important. And therefore, this point that actually has no way of standing. And last decline, I'd like to move on to my summary. So what is the motion asking us essentially? So the motion asks us whether or not grit is necessary. And we tell you that it is necessary because if you are the person who has absolutely nothing, we tell you that the odds are absolutely zero if you do not go out and try. And we tell you that even if it's a 0.001% of winning, we tell you that you should take that chance because you have literally nothing else. And this directly goes against the fact that they tell you that you should just stay home and do absolutely nothing because if you wanted it that much, you would just work for it that much. And this is yet another reason to side with people who side with grit. And we'd like to tell you, what does a world look like with grit? Well, a world without grit looks like people having goals which they really want to achieve, but for the sake of not having grit, you'll just say, maybe I'll just stay in today. And we tell you that with the actors analysis my second speaker has already given, the one thing that these most vulnerable actors want more is success. So we tell you that we directly feed into their need of success, and we tell you that this benefit is apparent on our side. With this point alone, we are able to win this debate as a whole, and how I've already debunked everything they said under the clash of whether grit detriments or benefits actors because they simply do not understand what they are debating for, as they have simply just mischaracterized the actors. So what does a world look like with grit? Well, we tell you that not everybody can win, and you are going up against a lot of people, yet at the same time, we tell you that this is extremely important because without it, you are definitely not winning. So we tell you that, okay, although it may not be guaranteed, we tell you that it is worth it because if you wanted this much, you would prove it to us. And you may say that everybody else wants this, and we say that if everybody wanted it as much as you, then they would be at the same level you are at. And we tell you that mischaracterization will not be accepted in motions which directly harm the future of the most vulnerable actor. I'm so proud to oppose.
Panel, you know a team has lost when firstly they misunderstand the motion and they try and tell us that we're trying to solve short-term problems. We're trying to solve problems without giving you so much harm, trying to solve things which are tangible, but we don't try and harm yourself without acknowledging the fact that it causes blood, sweat, and tears to achieve your goals. And secondly, it's sad to see that in the both first and second speakers, that they're contradicting their own options provided to an alternative solution to grit, right? So firstly, I'll be doing my clashes, right? So firstly, when I'll talk about my clash, I have two main clashes within today, one main clash within today, which I'll focus on heavily. So we see that when we see this main clash, we see who helps most vulnerable actor achieve their long-term goal, which option is better. So we're going to use the option which they provide, which is motivation, which was their main argument, right? So we see that on our side, we're pushing for grit. So how does grit do this, right? We see that we use the grit, which we've characterized as a discipline and your training of yourself to do things properly and in a way to achieve your goals, right? So we see this to achieve your goals, you have to overcome challenges. So using grit, you overcome those challenges because you want to achieve those long-term goals, which you've already characterized within today's debate, within our O1 and O2, right? So we see this to overcome those challenges, you need a form of grit, and you need a form of ability to say that, okay, these challenges are here, and I'm going to overcome them to achieve that long-term goal, which you sadly don't get on the proposition side, right? Which I'll go on when we look at their side, right? So we tell you that you have to sacrifice a bit to achieve your goals, which I've already told you within all of our speakers, right? It causes blood, sweat, and tears to achieve your goals. But when we look at the comparative, they're painting this happy picture that you can have everything at once when trying to achieve a goal, right? But we see this actually doesn't happen. We've told you this in our O1 and O2, right? And O3, that you can't have all these happy things, happy bundling, happy things. When you're trying to achieve goals and success, you have to sacrifice something. You have to sacrifice time. You have to sacrifice a bit of Saturdays to study for your exams properly. So when we see this, right? But then what was their main goal? Their main thing was pushing forward motivation. So when we see motivation, this is where the contradiction starts happening within their speakers, because the O1's definition of motivation was you having the ability to overcome a challenge, but while not costing your mental health. But with O2, they came up and said it's the feeling, not the action of actually doing that. So we have no idea which we're going to use, but we're just going to go along with their most recent speaker. So we see that we're going to use that, right? So we see this motivation doesn't harm you, it just helps you achieve it. But we don't see this fully, because motivation is not an action. It's not an action, it's just a feeling to do it. So it doesn't help you at all to achieve your long-term goals, because if you have a challenge, you're just going to feel to overcome the challenge, but you're not going to do the challenge. So already with this clash, we already see that team opposition has won this clash because of the main fact that we overcome the challenges. We overcome the challenge to attain this sense of prosperity. But when we look at the comparative, we don't have that at all. When we look at what their characterization of their second speaker, right? So let's do a comparative analysis. What I'll be weighing up is the two worlds. So we're going to weigh up our world versus theirs, right? So let's look at their world firstly. So first we look at their world in the sense of what they're pushing for, motivation, right? So we see this, right? When we look at the most vulnerable actor in the sense of motivation, so we're going to try and achieve a long-term goal, which is the key word within today's motion, because it was what grit is within the info slide that we had, right, which they didn't attack us on at all when they bring up the short terms, but we won't deal with that now. So when we see that, right, we see that motivation doesn't help you achieve those long-term goals, because it's like a short-term boost or short-term energy drink when you try to achieve your long-term goals, which uses their characterization. So we see that to achieve your long-term goals, you need a sense of doing something to your best ability to achieve it long-term. You need something that's going to last you a long time. So you see that on their side, you don't get that at all. But on our side, you do. You get the sense that you want. You get your goal that you want. You get all that you achieve what you want at the cost of a Saturday that you lose, or of a few nights, sleepless nights, to get those marks that you get. So all those are just sacrifices which you get to achieve everything you get. So with all that being said, if you're going to side with a team that pushes for the betterment of the actors, you're going to side with team opposition.
I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. A side which only engages with the worst case scenario of proposition is a side that loses this debate. So 3 things in the speech. First of all, I'm going to be weighing first the worst case scenario for both sides, the best case scenario for both sides. I'm going to be explaining to you strategic flaws, and then I'll get onto the clashes. So first of all, what does the worst case scenario look like? The worst case scenario looks like failure for both sides. Now, under proposition, we tell you that even in the worst case scenario, even when you fail to achieve your goals, you still have these things like mental health, you still have your wellness, friends, these little things. And why do these things matter? Because these are the things that support and make life more fulfilling. Because humans are social animals. Things like this. We prefer a world where even if you fail to achieve your goals, you still have that family support. You don't lose everything. We tell you that on the opposition side, their worst case scenario in failure is that they don't have that support system. Their health, their mental health, their physical health are at a detriment. Their family and friends, they've forgone them. They've forgotten them so that they can achieve their goals. This means that in their failure, they lose it all, even the goal. What does the best case scenario look for both sides? The best case scenario is, obviously, the best case scenario for proposition is that you achieve the goal and you still have the support system. And we tell you that you're more likely to achieve the goal because you have these mechanizations such as brakes. You have these mechanizations such as a support behind you. You have these mechanizations like friends and family motivating you. But when you forego those things, when you try and cut them away in order to achieve your goal, we tell you you're less likely to succeed. But even in the best case scenario for side opposition, and this is what we've engaged with today, their best case scenario, well, they've engaged with our worst case scenario, so we should win on that regardless. But we tell you that they may have the happiness of achieving the goal, but in our best case scenario, we get that anyway. But we also tell you they get nothing else. They can get into Harvard without friends and family. They can become the top lawyer at their law firm without a mental health support system. So we tell you that the goals are not the most important thing. I'd also like to point out the debate's not about grit as a mechanism, it's about the glorification of grit, and we have opposed this glorification of grit. 3 strategic flaws today. First of all, they haven't mechanized any of their reasons. They told us that motivation is not enough and that grit is the enabling action. It's the drive, it's what enables you to actually act on these emotions, but they didn't mechanize this. We tell you that this is a strategic flaw because we can't understand the reasons why motivation is different from grit when they tell us that grit is the enabling action, but they don't give us specific reasons why. We also tell you that they can't have the best of both worlds. They can't have grit being, oh, sure, I'll take this, I'll not go out this Saturday so that I can work my project, but next Saturday is fine. We tell you that is motivation, that is not grit. Grit is foregoing everything. Grit is working in the face of all of these harms so that you can achieve your goals. These are assertions, we cannot believe these assertions, which means that we cannot opt into this. They needed to provide mechanizations. The second strategic flaw is that they didn't have any engagement with this glorification. They didn't engage within the idea of this glorification, and we tell you that this has a very real detriment to side opposition's case, because we tell you that this glorification film needed is what allows and is what enables grit to have these detriments in the real world. And we tell you that by side opposition not engaging in this, they already should lose the debate. Now, the third is that it's a hung case. All we have to prove in today's debate is that grit is not necessary to achieve your goals, and we win this debate. We told you that you're more likely to achieve your goals because you have these mechanizations behind it, because you have the support system. And so all we had to do was prove that grit is not necessary and to achieve goals, and we have done this. The clashes today we're surrounding all of these things, but we tell you that what happens when you fail in the best and the worst case scenario, side proposition has won this debate. We tell you that not only do we have the mechanization, not only have we told you why you should believe our case, but we have also given to you the reasons why side proposition is less likely to fail than side opposition, and why they are more likely to lead a more fulfilling life even if they do fail. We have given you our best case and we have given you our worst case, and side opposition loses in both of those. I have never been prouder to propose. Thank you.
quite sure you guys understood in terms of your framing of what grit is. That was the main clash, right? Grit versus motivation. Are they two different things? Are they shades of the same thing? Where do you start? Where do you stop? So let's put that aside. And I just want to speak to you guys in terms of your long term. So for this weekend, as in, what are your guys' goals, what you should be focusing on. Because if you want to make provs, the visual team, which I assume that's kind of what everybody wants to do, then you can get a bad debate in terms of content, but you as a speaker and what you need to work on, that's more important. Because then, the topic can fluctuate. So I think on the whole, everybody's really good speakers. So let's start there. So everybody in terms of speaking, you're really good. If you want individual feedback on things that you should do more of and things you should do less of, then obviously you can come to me afterwards and we can chat about that. Unless you guys want me to do you want me to just start or should we do it individually? Individually? Yes, no, individually? Individually.
Because you can go outside individually.
Individually, so let's leave that aside. And then, another thing I want you guys to focus on moving forward is you guys need to have cohesion as a team. Because a lot of times what's happening is that your one speaker will say something, and then your other speaker comes and says something that contradicts what your previous speaker said. And that happened mostly between either first and third, or between second and third, or between third and reply. Okay, so just focus on that. And I know that in the moment you're not hearing, because during prep you guys have agreed that this is what we're going to say. Then when you get in the room and people start talking and nerves get in the way, and you're focusing on the argument that you had agreed on outside, but then when you're on the podium, you're trying to engage what's happening. Sometimes you get mixed up. And so I really want you guys to focus on being very precise about listening to what you're saying, to listening to what you're thinking, and then what you're actually saying. Okay, because I could see that there was a bit of that happening. So just be careful. And also there's a difference between, because I could understand what you wanted to say, but I can't mark you on what you wanted to say. I have to mark you on what you actually said. Okay, so just to use an example, the example was in Ox argument. So this whole thing about the vulnerable actor, right? I don't think we agreed on who the vulnerable actor is in terms of what are their actual characteristics. Because on the one hand, we're talking about vulnerable actors are, the people who want to achieve their goals. Those are vulnerable actors. And then it was actually vulnerable actors are people whose standing in society, maybe historically disadvantaged people, and as an example of the people who want to achieve their goals. But you are supposed to frame that before, do you know what I mean? Like the previous speaker, the one who brings up the characteristics of the vulnerable actors, the one who was giving me my parameters, my boundaries, like who actually is this vulnerable actor. Because then they were engaging with the general idea of the vulnerable actor as, just in a neutral society, in an equal society, just someone who wants to achieve their goals. But then if you then come up and say, no, actually, it's someone who is disadvantaged in some way, so we need to have an equitable approach to what a vulnerable actor is, then that's a different debate. You see what I'm saying? So just focus on that. So things like that. And that's just a team thing, and that comes down to your strategy. It comes down to what have we agreed on before we walked in the room. Have we painted enough of a picture, and does everybody understand? Because we all have different understandings, even as individuals. You guys will have a different understanding of what someone is saying and how you receive it. So just make sure. So that's just a team cohesion understanding thing. Okay. I'm not going to keep you long enough, but this is important for you to just sleep on and to think about. So the main thing, okay, so we didn't agree on who the vulnerable actor is, and we, up until the end, did not agree on what motivation is and what grit is. And we also had a lot of, catastrophizing, if I can, for lack of a better word. So best case, worst case. So there wasn't a very kind of, okay, this is the middle ground, but we're actually taking the hard line and we're actually taking the soft line. So again, and I'm not bragging on you, I promise, but it's just another example, is that, so they did not properly define. Okay, so we can agree on that. It was there, but the parameters were not properly set out. And so from the get-go, we were disagreeing about what we were talking about and what the parameters were, right? So when it then came to how do you respond to that, there was a difference in how you guys interpreted that and how you moved and incorporated it into your speeches. Grit and motivation are not the same thing. They're not the same thing, right? They're not the same thing. Because there was somebody who said that motivation is wanting to do something. That is desire. Desire is wanting to do something, right? Motivation is what gets you to actually do it. So my desire is that I want to memorize the Quran, right? I want to memorize the Quran by the time I die, right? That's my holy book, my religion. I want to memorize it. It's 114 chapters. It is 6,719 verses. It's a lot of memorizing, right? So that's a difficult task. That's like a substantial task, right? And so if we can agree that the goals that we're talking about, it's not just I want to walk down, to the traffic circle. That's not, that's, you know what I mean? So we also need to be able to define what type of goals are we talking about. So that's why we had that short-term, long-term thing. We also didn't agree on that. So that was also your job to then tell us, And then I know that you guys were like, no, but the topic said, and then you guys were like, no, actually the topic said, and then there was just this happening. And I feel like it is your job to define it, and then they have to accept it unless it's unreasonable. Right, so they have to accept unless it's unreasonable. And so on both sides, I didn't hear, so I could hear why people were saying, no, take our side because of this, and you're saying, no, actually, take our side because of that. But it comes down to, if it is reasonable, you have to accept it. So what I wanted to hear was, it is not reasonable, and therefore we're not accepting it. Which you did try, but then you didn't do it well enough, because then now you're arguing amongst yourselves. Do you see what I mean? And that's where you sort of help. Okay. So that was that. So just off the premise, we were not agreeing on what we were talking about. And grit, so motivation is actually getting up and doing something. Grit is what keeps you doing it. That's what grit is. Because I'm motivated to do something, but I need to continue. What is that extra thing? So if you can think of desire as an I want to do something, motivation being like a step above desire, grit is what keeps you going. I don't know if you guys watch anime. But Shingeki no Kyojin, Attack on Titan. I don't know if you guys, it's a really good anime. But so Attack on Titan is just, and that was just off the top of my head. It's a really good example of what grit is. So just to give a very short synopsis so that you guys understand for those who don't know, it's basically in a post-apocalyptic world. There are people who live in a walled, gated city, right? Those are the last of the humans. They live in a gated city, and then these huge titans, like these deformed, like 4-foot, 5-foot humanoids, start attacking them. And so they have to come up with this like soldier army thingy to like attack the titans. So one of the children in the gated city then grows up to become this protagonist or antagonist, depending on where you stand, but he sees his family killed by these humanoids, and then he has, the hero's journey, he's like upset, so that's his desire is to kill the humanoids that killed his family, right? And his motivation is the pain, right? The pain of seeing his mother being eaten by this thing. Then he's like, that's the thing that's sort of driving him, right? And he was a baby when it happened, and then he grew up, and as he's growing up, he stays angry, right? He stays broken, and he becomes part of the war faction thing, and then it turns out he's got superpowers, but that's not the point. The point is that he ends up destroying the entire world. So his pain kind of, it like mutates into this thing that then keeps him going, because then that pain kind of anesthetizes into this hard, cold thing here in his chest that he can never let go of it, and then it keeps going until he destroys the world. So that's an example of grit. So then what I wanted to hear, and it kind of came out in third speaker speeches, but not enough, is grit, do we need it to succeed? So it was a thread, but it wasn't, that was what the debate was about, to say glorification of grit. And you guys had mentioned glorification of grit, that's what we're talking about. but then you guys took it to, you guys did not address the question. You identified the issue, but you did not actually unpack it in the way that I was hoping you could unpack it. To say, okay, so grit is something that keeps you going. But when we're glorifying it, who is the vulnerable actor? And when you look at their psyche, so we've got this deranged ballerina, or we've got this alcoholic chess player, or we've got this child who's fighting titans. What do they have in common? What do they have in common? Trauma. All three of them. They've got some kind of trauma, and they've got an inclination or like underlying factors that make them more inclined to fall off the deep end. That is our vulnerable actor within this premise. So yes, you can have an example of poor people, you can have an example of disadvantaged people, but within the premise of the debate, the specific examples that you guys were given in the slide, that is supposed to help you to have your context and to have your premises and then to fight within that. Okay, I hope I'm making sense. So I think for future, that's what we need to see. So from my feedback, nobody won the debate, let me put it like that. It just came down on substance, because it was very much like, so it came down to numbers and like the individual scores, and obviously the team that has the highest scores is the team that won the debate, basically. But on substance, I think both sides had some good things and some bad things, and so substance wasn't great. But like I said from the beginning, the content can be hit or miss, and this one was a miss, which is fine because you only had like an hour. I don't know if this was a good motion. No, it wasn't. So exactly. So the content, I acknowledged that, okay, fine, you didn't have enough time to read. So it came down to your speaking, and that's something that you guys can work on moving forward. Okay, so proposition 1 debate, just based on speaker scores. Okay, based on speaker scores, proposition 1 debate. But really, you guys should run, because they didn't set up their case well, and your job is just to tell me why they didn't set it up well, and because you guys are fundamentally contradicting each other, that's where you fell. Okay, but we can chat about that afterwards, just how you guys can do better. Like, I'll talk to you about it. Okay, good job, guys. We're gonna talk outside and go home soon, so maybe